In the beginning, there was no sky, no earth, no gods, only a shapeless chaos. Then, from the stillness, a single being emerged, cracked open a cosmic egg, and began to build the universe with his own body. This is not a tale from ancient Greece or Mesopotamia. It is the foundational myth of China, a civilization whose mythology spans more than 4,000 years, layered with creation stories, divine rulers, immortal sages, epic floods, and rebellious monkeys who challenge the heavens. What did the Chinese people believe about the origin of the world? How did those beliefs shape their understanding of nature, power, and the afterlife? And why do these ancient stories still matter in the 21st century? To answer those questions, we begin at the very beginning. Let's begin. Long before emperors ruled and dragons flew across painted scrolls, long before the Great Wall wound its way across northern China, there was only chaos. In the earliest stories passed down through Chinese tradition, the universe began as a shapeless mass. It had no light, no dark, no up, no down, only a swirling mixture of everything and nothing. This concept of undifferentiated chaos is called Hundun in ancient Chinese texts, and it represented a state before time, space, or matter had any form. From this primordial chaos, something remarkable emerged. According to one of the most enduring myths, a cosmic egg formed at the heart of the swirling void. This egg held within it the essence of the entire universe: sky, earth, elements, light, darkness, order, and disorder. And inside this egg lay a single being, Pangu. Pangu is the first living creature in many Chinese creation myths. His story first appears in written form during the Three Kingdoms period, which lasted from the early 3rd century to the late 3rd century CE. The account is preserved in the writings of Shuzheng, a Daoist scholar who lived during this fragmented era of Chinese history. According to Shuzheng, Pangu slept inside the egg for over 18,000 years. During this time, all opposites, yin and yang, hot and cold, heavy and light, gradually began to separate. Eventually, the egg cracked open. As the lighter elements floated upward to form the heavens and the heavier parts sank to become the earth, Pangu awoke and found himself trapped between the two. To keep the sky and the earth from collapsing back into each other, Pangu stood tall and pushed them apart. Every day, for another 18,000 years, he grew 10 feet taller, and the sky stretched 10 feet higher above him. As time passed, his body grew immense. Eventually, when he had completed his task, Pangu laid down and died. But his death was not an end. It was a transformation. From Pangu's breath came the wind. His voice became thunder. His left eye became the sun, and his right eye became the moon. His blood turned into rivers, his muscles into fertile lands, his bones into mountains. Even the parasites on his body were said to have become the first human beings. This story does not belong to one single school of Chinese thought. Rather, it blends early Daoist cosmology with popular folk beliefs. In the Daoist worldview, the balance between yin and yang, complementary opposites, is essential to all existence. Pangu's actions reflect this idea. By separating and stabilizing the opposites, he allows harmony to emerge from chaos. Unlike the more familiar creation stories in the West, which often involve a god deliberately creating the world, the myth of Pangu is more organic. It emphasizes transformation and natural balance rather than divine command. There is no moral judgment in this story, just a universe that must unfold in balance. Pangu's myth likely evolved over centuries, drawing from older shamanic and animist traditions. In some southern regions of China, particularly among minority groups like the Zhuang and Yao peoples, oral traditions speak of a cosmic giant or a divine craftsman who shapes the world with his body. These regional stories often share core elements but differ in the details. showing how local culture and belief influenced mythology over time. The idea of the universe being formed from a cosmic body is not unique to China, but the specific symbolism in the Pangu myth is deeply Chinese. The transformation of a being into natural elements ties human existence closely to the land. Mountains, rivers, forests, they are not just part of the landscape, they are sacred remnants of the first being. Some scholars have pointed out that the Pangu myth may have developed as a response to philosophical questions raised during the Warring States period, which spanned from the 5th century BCE to the 3rd century BCE. During that time, thinkers debated the origins of the world and humanity's place within it. Daoist and Confucian schools both sought answers, and myth offered a way to express ideas that went beyond logic or text. The written version of the Pangu myth appears relatively late in Chinese literary history, especially when compared to ancient myths from the Shennong or Zhou dynasties. Yet its themes echo much older traditions. The idea that the cosmos is born from within itself, rather than created by a separate deity, reflects a worldview centered on continuity, transformation, and the interdependence of all things. Over time, Pangu became a symbol of endurance and cosmic responsibility. Images of him holding the sky above his head, often bearded and muscular, appear in art and folklore across various parts of China. He is not worshipped as a god in most traditions, but his story remains one of the most powerful representations of mythic creation in Chinese culture. With the cosmos now separated into sky and earth, the world began to take shape. But it did not unfold through natural processes alone. In Chinese mythology, the forces of nature were not mechanical, they were alive. The world was not only formed but guided, maintained, and sometimes disrupted by divine beings who emerged in the wake of Pangu's great act of separation. These early deities were not gods in the Western sense. They were not all-powerful, nor were they necessarily immortal in the strictest terms. Instead, they were personifications of elemental forces, embodiments of mountains, rivers, stars, winds, and other features of the natural world. In many cases, their actions helped structure the physical and moral world that humans would eventually inhabit. One of the earliest and most important of these beings was Nuwa, a goddess with a human face and the body of a serpent or dragon. She is among the central figures in ancient Chinese mythology and appears in texts dating back to the Han Dynasty, which began in the 3rd century BCE. Nuwa is most often associated with the creation of life and the protection of the natural order. According to several traditions, after Pangu's death, the earth was still barren and silent. Nuwa, moved by loneliness or perhaps by duty, began to fashion human beings. She scooped up yellow clay from the riverbanks and molded small figures by hand. These handmade figures became the ancestors of nobles and scholars. Later, when her hands grew tired, she dipped a rope in mud and swung it through the air. The droplets that fell became common people, farmers, workers, and the everyday members of society. This symbolic story helped explain social hierarchy in ancient Chinese culture, while also reinforcing the idea that all humans shared a divine origin. Nuwa's creative role did not end there. In one of the most famous myths about her, the world faces a catastrophe. A powerful water god named Gong Gong, in a fit of rage, strikes his head against Mount Buzhou, one of the cosmic pillars supporting the heavens. As a result, the pillar collapses, and the sky tears open. The earth tilts, causing floods, fires, and environmental disorder. The sun and moon are thrown off their paths. Chaos returns. Faced with this disaster, Nuwa takes it upon herself to repair the world. She melts down 5 colored stones to mend the hole in the sky, cuts the legs off a giant turtle to prop up the heavens, and slays a black dragon that terrorizes the land. Her actions restore cosmic balance, allowing life to continue. This myth serves several purposes. It reinforces Nuwa's role as a divine caretaker, a figure of compassion and resilience. It also offers a mythical explanation for observed features of the natural world. For example, the Earth in Chinese geography is said to tilt to the southeast, a detail often attributed to Gong Gong's destructive act. The irregularities of nature, in other words, are not accidents, but remnants of mythic struggle. Gong Gong himself is a notable figure. He is not evil in the traditional sense, but a force of unchecked emotion and chaos. His defeat marks the triumph of order over chaos, not once, but continuously, as Chinese myths often emphasize the need for ongoing balance rather than permanent victory. As the world stabilized, more gods emerged to take on specific domains. One such figure is Zhurong, the god of fire. Zhurong appears in early Chinese myth as both a divine official and a warrior. In some accounts, he battles Gong Gong to preserve order, riding a tiger into battle and defending the structure of the world. His association with fire links him not only to destruction, but also to transformation and civilization. Alongside Zhurong stands Hou Yi, a divine archer known for his role in a later myth involving 10 sons. Though his story belongs to a different context, his early presence in myth connects the divine world with human skills like archery and hunting, reinforcing the idea that knowledge comes from the divine. Another major figure in this period of cosmic formation is Fuxi, who is often described as Nuwa's brother and husband. Like Nuwa, Fuxi has a serpentine lower body and is considered one of the culture heroes of ancient China. He is credited with teaching humanity essential skills such as fishing, hunting, and animal domestication. Most importantly, he is said to have created the 8 trigrams, or bagua, which form the basis of divination in the I Ching, or Book of Changes. These trigrams represent natural elements: heaven, earth, thunder, wind, water, fire, mountain, and lake, and are arranged in patterns that symbolize balance, change, and interaction. In creating the trigrams, Fuxi introduces an abstract system that links human activity to cosmic order. His teachings signal the beginning of Chinese metaphysical thought and its connection to myth. In some versions of the mythology, Fuxi and Nuwa are said to have ruled together as divine sovereigns during an age of harmony. They are often depicted intertwined, forming a symbol of unity between male and female, heaven and earth, yin and yang. This union is not just romantic but cosmological, representing balance between opposing forces that sustains life. The formation of the world in Chinese mythology is not a one-time event. Rather, it is a continuous process of organizing, correcting, and refining the cosmos. Each god or mythic figure contributes something essential: tools, structures, ideas that allow the human world to function within a larger divine framework. These early stories do not describe a singular pantheon like those of ancient Greece or Rome. Instead, Chinese mythology presents a layered, evolving cast of figures whose importance can vary by region, period, or philosophical context. This flexibility allows the myths to adapt, merge, and reflect the values of different eras. For example, during the Han Dynasty, which lasted from the 3rd century BCE to the 3rd century CE, these creation myths were gradually woven into Daoist cosmology and imperial ideology. The figures of Nuwa and Fuxi were reinterpreted not only as ancestors of humanity, but also as symbols of good governance and cosmic legitimacy. In this way, mythology became more than storytelling. It became part of how rulers justified their power and how scholars explained the workings of the universe. Through the actions of Nuwa, Fuxi, Zhurong, and other early gods, the world becomes a place of order. It is no longer just separated sky and earth, but a living system where seasons change, rivers flow, and human beings begin to build communities. The myths give meaning to the physical environment while also shaping early Chinese values: harmony, balance, duty, and respect for the natural world. As the mythic world solidifies, the focus begins to shift. No longer centered only on creation and divine action, Chinese mythology begins to explore the rise of early leaders, part human, part divine, who will guide society and teach the ways of moral life. With the heavens raised and the earth stabilized, the world had form, structure, and balance. But it was still quiet, too quiet. Mountains loomed, rivers ran, the sky moved in predictable rhythm, but there were no voices, no homes, no one to witness the beauty or to give meaning to the natural order. According to one of the most cherished myths in Chinese tradition, this is where Nuwa took her next step, not as a cosmic repairer, but as a creator of life itself. Nuwa had already played a vital role in mending the broken sky and re-establishing order after Gong Gong's destructive rage. Yet her story does not end there. In a world that had regained its balance, it was Nuwa who first imagined what it might mean to populate it, with beings who could walk the land, think, speak, build, and above all, remember. This myth of humanity's creation appears in multiple ancient sources, including oral traditions, ritual texts, and early chronicles compiled during the Han Dynasty. While the earliest surviving written accounts date from roughly the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, it is clear that these stories circulated for generations before they were written down. They were part of the shared cultural vocabulary across regions, from the Yellow River Basin to the southern hills. The myth begins with Nuwa alone in a world of quiet splendor. She roams the valleys and mountains and listens to the rustle of trees and the songs of birds, yet she finds herself growing lonely. Not in the sense of sorrow, but in the sense of incompleteness. The world, while beautiful, lacks companionship, creativity, and interaction. Moved by this sense of absence, Nuwa begins to form human figures from the soft yellow clay found along the banks of the Yellow River. She kneels, scoops the earth in her hands, and shapes it into small, delicate forms, each one resembling her own face but made mortal. These early humans stand up, stretch, and begin to explore the world around them. They laugh, speak, and multiply. In many versions of the myth, these handcrafted figures become the ancestors of nobles, scholars, and officials. Their creation is deliberate, careful, and full of intention. But Nuwa soon finds that creating each human individually is slow and exhausting. To continue populating the earth, she dips a rope into the river mud and swings it through the air. Wherever a drop lands, a human springs up from the earth. These people, born of splatter and chance, become the common folk: farmers, laborers, merchants. This story, though brief in form, contains powerful symbolic meaning. It offers a mythical explanation for social class distinctions in ancient Chinese society, linking them to divine origins. Yet it also emphasizes the shared humanity of all people, regardless of how they were made. Whether carefully molded or flung into existence, all humans are children of the same goddess, born of the same earth. Beyond the social symbolism, the myth also reflects a deep philosophical theme: the connection between humans and the natural world. In Chinese cosmology, humans are not separate from nature. They are extensions of it. Made from clay and animated by divine breath, they are rooted in the same material as rivers, stones, and stars. This understanding would shape not only religious thought, but also medical theory, political philosophy, and art throughout Chinese history. Another element worth noting is Nuwa's choice of yellow clay. Yellow holds special significance in Chinese culture. It is associated with the center of the compass, with earth among the 5 elements, and with the Yellow Emperor, who will appear later in the mythic timeline. The use of yellow clay thus connects humanity to the earth both physically and symbolically, grounding people within the broader cosmic system. Nuwa's creation of humans also introduces the idea of moral responsibility. As the mother of all humans, she does not merely make life and walk away. In later traditions, she is seen as a protector, one who watches over human affairs from a distance. Her earlier act of repairing the heavens foreshadowed this role. She does not abandon the world when it falters. This nurturing aspect of Nuwa would influence the way divine figures were portrayed in Chinese folklore for centuries to come. Unlike gods of war or judgment, Nuwa represents continuity, healing, and maternal care. She is rarely worshipped with grand temples or state rituals, but remains one of the most beloved figures in household traditions and regional stories. There are also versions of Nuwa's myth in which her relationship with her brother and consort, Fuxi, plays a central role in the creation of humanity. In these accounts, Nuwa and Fuxi recognize that for the human race to survive, they must become the first married couple. The idea of a divine pair founding civilization echoes through many cultures. But in Chinese mythology, their union also represents the balance between yin and yang, female and male, water and fire, emotion and reason. In a famous illustration from a Han-era tomb mural, Nuwa and Fuxi are shown with serpent-like tails intertwined, holding the tools of civilization. Nuwa holds a compass, symbolizing the heavens and emotion, while Fuxi holds a square, representing the earth and reason. Together, they embody not only marital harmony, but also cosmic balance. Their cooperation ensures that humans are not only born, but also taught. Nuwa's act of creation was not a one-time event. In some myths, she is called upon again to remake humanity after great disasters, whether caused by floods, fire, or war. This idea reflects the fragility of the human condition. People are not immune to catastrophe, but they are never abandoned entirely. There is always the possibility of renewal. The legacy of Nuwa extends far beyond the ancient myths. Her figure appears in poems, plays, and paintings throughout Chinese history. During the Tang dynasty, she was praised as the Divine Mother. In Daoist texts, she became associated with sacred mountains and immortality. In popular religion, she was remembered during seasonal festivals and family offerings. Her story, though ancient, never vanished. In modern times, Nuwa has reappeared in literature, television, and even video games as a symbol of creativity and compassion. Her story continues to resonate in a world that still grapples with questions of balance, care, and creation. As the world settled and humans began to fill the land, a new kind of need emerged, beyond mere existence. Humanity, though created by divine hands, was still primitive. People wandered the forests and plains, uncertain of how to live together, how to feed themselves, or how to understand the forces around them. Nature was vast, unpredictable, and often harsh. To survive, human beings needed knowledge. To thrive, they needed guidance. That guidance came in the form of Fuxi, a culture hero and sage whose contributions to Chinese mythology mark the beginning of civilization. Unlike earlier figures who shaped the physical cosmos, Fuxi's legacy lies in what he gave to human society: tools, systems, and structure. He is remembered not only as a demigod, but as the first teacher of mankind. Fuxi's origins are closely tied to Nuwa, with whom he is sometimes portrayed as sibling, spouse, or divine counterpart. While Nuwa brought humanity into being, it was Fuxi who showed people how to live, how to cooperate, build families, make tools, and understand the rhythms of the universe. His mythic presence emerges during the early stages of Chinese mythological time, often grouped among the three sovereigns, a trio of culture-bearing figures said to have reigned before the rise of dynasties. The stories of Fuxi likely took shape during the Warring States period and became more systematized during the Han Dynasty, when scholars began codifying China's mythic past. Over time, Fuxi came to symbolize not just a person, but a turning point in human development, the passage from survival to society. One of the first things Fuxi is credited with is the invention of fishing and hunting tools. Early humans, according to myth, lived by gathering fruit and scavenging what they could. Under Fuxi's guidance, they learned to craft nets from vines, fish from rivers, and use spears for hunting. These innovations made it possible for communities to grow and for people to settle near rivers and lakes. The connection between humans and water, so central to Chinese life, was deepened by Fuxi's teachings. He also introduced the concept of domesticating animals. Instead of chasing wild beasts across hills and plains, people began to raise pigs, cattle, and chickens. The transition to animal husbandry represents more than a technical skill. It marks a psychological shift from a life of uncertainty to one of planning, cultivation, and permanence. Fuxi's influence extended beyond survival to social organization. He is credited with inventing the institution of marriage. Before his time, according to myth, people lived in chaos without stable relationships or moral codes. Fuxi introduced ritualized unions and family structure, which formed the foundation for broader societal order. Through this, the earliest models of kinship, hierarchy, and moral responsibility began to form. In later Confucian interpretations, Fuxi's role as the originator of marriage was celebrated as the beginning of human ethics. Harmony in the household was seen as the basis for harmony in the state. As such, Fuxi's contributions were not just technical, they were moral and philosophical. But perhaps the most profound and enduring of Fuxi's contributions was the creation of the 8 trigrams, or bagua. These symbols, each made up of 3 lines, either solid or broken, represent fundamental natural forces: heaven, earth, fire, water, wind, thunder, mountain, and lake. When arranged in different sequences, they describe changes in the natural world and human life. Fuxi is said to have observed the patterns of the sky, the flow of rivers, the movement of animals, and the changes in the seasons. From these observations, he developed the trigrams as a way to symbolize and interpret the universe. The trigrams would later form the foundation of the I Ching, or Book of Changes, one of the oldest and most influential texts in Chinese culture. The I Ching is not a book of magic or prophecy, as some misunderstand it, but a sophisticated system for thinking about change, balance, and decision-making. It treats life as a series of evolving situations, each requiring thoughtful action based on the dynamics of opposing forces, yin and yang. Fuxi's trigrams thus introduced an abstract language for navigating uncertainty. The image of Fuxi drawing the trigrams is iconic in Chinese art. He is often depicted with a long beard and serpent-like tail, paired with Nuwa standing above a river, holding a compass or writing tool. The circular arrangement of the trigrams around him suggests cosmic order, a vision of the universe as comprehensible and interactive. By linking observation with symbolism, Fuxi gave human beings a tool not just to understand their environment, but to understand themselves. In this sense, he represents the birth of philosophy, the belief that the world has patterns and that wisdom comes from perceiving and harmonizing with those patterns. The cultural reach of Fuxi's myth is immense. During the Zhou dynasty, which preceded the Warring States period, kings traced their legitimacy to the 3 sovereigns, including Fuxi. His name appears in bronze inscriptions, temple carvings, and genealogical records of noble families. In Daoist texts, he is described as an immortal sage who achieved transcendence through virtue and insight. In folk religion, he is venerated in temples dedicated to ancestral founders. His influence can also be seen in Chinese political thought. The idea that leadership should be based on observation of nature and alignment with cosmic principles rather than arbitrary power has roots in the myth of Fuxi. Just as he read the patterns of heaven and earth to guide humanity, later rulers were expected to read the mandate of heaven and govern accordingly. In summary, Fuxi's myth marks a transformational moment in Chinese mythology. It moves the narrative from divine intervention to human development. From this point forward, myth begins to focus less on the creation of the world and more on the shaping of society. The gods step back slightly, and the culture heroes step forward. Fuxi is not remembered for waging war or building empires. His legacy is quieter, but no less significant. He taught humanity how to live with purpose, how to interpret the signs of nature, and how to build a life that could endure beyond a single generation. As civilization began to take root under the guidance of figures like Fuxi, Chinese mythology introduced a new generation of legendary leaders. These were not gods in the traditional sense, nor were they ordinary humans. They were semi-divine, virtuous rulers known for their wisdom, innovation, and moral authority. They are remembered collectively as the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, and their stories form the bridge between mythic time and early Chinese history. The myth of the three sovereigns and five emperors does not refer to a literal sequence of rulers with confirmed historical dates. Rather, these figures represent stages of social and cultural development, with each ruler credited for specific contributions to human advancement. Their reigns are said to have occurred thousands of years before the first historically verified dynasties of China, possibly around the 3rd millennium BCE or earlier in the broad period of Chinese prehistory. Let us begin with the three sovereigns, also known as the three august ones. Though different sources occasionally list different names, the most commonly accepted trio includes Fuxi, Shennong, and Suiren. While Fuxi's achievements in social organization and cosmic interpretation were already established in previous traditions, the next figure, Shennong, or the divine farmer, brought innovation in agriculture and medicine. Shennong is credited with teaching people how to till the land, cultivate crops, and harness the cycles of planting and harvest. Before his influence, humans were said to survive on wild plants with little control over food sources. Under Shennong's guidance, early agricultural society began to emerge. Shennong's most well-known legacy lies in his exploration of herbal medicine. According to legend, he personally tasted hundreds of plants to understand their effects, some healing, others poisonous. He is said to have possessed a transparent body so that he could observe the impact of each substance as it entered his system. Through this process of self-sacrifice, he compiled one of the first herbal pharmacopoeias. Many of the herbs still used in traditional Chinese medicine today, such as ginseng and licorice root, were reportedly identified by Shennong. Beyond his scientific contributions, Shennong also symbolizes the principle of benevolent leadership. He is often depicted with ox horns, a nod to his connection with farming and the land, and he is remembered for ruling without violence, using virtue and persuasion instead. The third of the three sovereigns, Suiren, is less well known in popular tradition, but equally important. He is said to have discovered how to create fire by drilling wood. This act of mastering fire transformed human life, allowing for cooked food, warmth, and protection. Suiren's innovation, simple though it seems, marks a decisive step in the development of early technology. Together, the three sovereigns represent the essential tools of civilization: knowledge of nature, mastery of fire, structured society, and moral leadership. They embody the values of endurance, curiosity, and responsibility that Chinese culture has long associated with legitimate rule. Following the three sovereigns are the five emperors, figures who furthered human progress through moral governance, social reform, and strategic leadership. These are not emperors in the imperial sense, but wise rulers remembered for their virtue and effectiveness. The most prominent of the five emperors is the Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi. The Yellow Emperor is a foundational figure in Chinese myth and identity. He is believed to have reigned during the 27th century BCE and is often credited as the ancestor of all Han Chinese people. His name appears in countless historical, philosophical, and medical texts, and he is honored not only for his wisdom but for his role in unifying early tribes and defending against chaos. Under the Yellow Emperor's rule, several major innovations were said to have occurred. His ministers invented writing, mathematics, and calendrical systems. Tools like the compass, the cart, and early weapons were developed. Silk weaving began under the guidance of his wife, Leizu, who is said to have discovered the process of reeling silk from cocoons after observing silkworms in a mulberry grove. The Yellow Emperor is also known for his military leadership. In the mythic Battle of Zholu, he defeated a powerful and disruptive tribal leader named Qi Yu, who had used magic and metal weapons to wage war. This battle is often portrayed as a foundational struggle between order and disorder, with the Yellow Emperor representing unity and enlightened rule, while Qi Yu symbolizes unchecked aggression. With the help of a divine dragon named Yinglong and the use of strategic tools like the south-pointing chariot, a prototype for the compass, the Yellow Emperor's forces prevailed. This victory is remembered not just as a military triumph, but as the birth of centralized authority and cultural identity. The remaining four of the five emperors each added new dimensions to the mythic framework of ideal rule. Shu, a grandson of the Yellow Emperor, is said to have promoted religious reform and discouraged the worship of multiple gods in favor of a more orderly cosmology. He also introduced ritual practices that would later shape Confucian thought on governance and ceremony. Emperor Ku, another descendant, is credited with encouraging music and astronomy, advancing both the emotional and intellectual life of the people. His court included early sages who began to formalize rituals that connected human activity to the seasons and celestial cycles. Emperor Yao, perhaps the most revered of all, is remembered for his humility, justice, and sense of duty. He ruled not as a tyrant, but as a model of virtue. Faced with the question of succession, Yao bypassed his own sons and instead chose a man of great character and wisdom named Shun, ensuring that the nation would be led by merit rather than inheritance. This act became a powerful symbol in Chinese political philosophy, suggesting that moral integrity, not birthright, should determine leadership. Shun, the last of the 5 emperors, upheld and extended Yao's legacy. He was known for his filial piety, having endured great hardship and cruelty from his family while remaining loyal and forgiving. As emperor, he continued reforms in governance, irrigation, and cultural integration, working closely with key ministers who laid the groundwork for the earliest forms of state administration. Together, the 5 emperors established a model for rulership that emphasized virtue, ritual, and harmony with natural law. Their lives were not about conquest or wealth, but about service, fairness, and the development of a moral society. Confucian scholars, writing many centuries later, held up these rulers as the golden standard of government. Unlike myths that emphasize divine right or violent conquest, the Chinese tradition focuses here on ethical leadership. These rulers are not remembered for their divine powers, but for their wisdom and willingness to put the people first. Their stories provided a cultural blueprint for generations of kings, emperors, and officials. Even in modern China, the legacies of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors continue to shape national consciousness. They are referenced in education, honored in festivals, and invoked in political rhetoric as symbols of unity, order, and cultural continuity. Among the 5 emperors, none stands taller in myth and cultural legacy than the Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi. His story occupies a pivotal place in Chinese mythology, not only as a wise ruler and innovator, but as a unifier of tribes and a protector of order. If earlier mythological figures were creators and teachers, Huangdi was a stabilizer, a strategist, and a warrior king who faced one of the earliest and most defining conflicts in China's legendary past, the Battle of Zhuolu. According to ancient texts, such as the records of the grand historian, Shiji, by Sima Qian, and the classic of mountains and seas, Shan Hai Jing, the Yellow Emperor lived sometime in the 3rd millennium BCE, during a period when the tribes of ancient China were still scattered, often clashing for resources, territory, and influence. In this mythic era, political unity did not yet exist, and the concept of China as a single civilization had not taken shape. The Yellow Emperor, originally the chieftain of the Yuxiong tribe, is said to have risen to prominence through a combination of diplomacy, moral leadership, and military strength. But his greatest challenge came from a fearsome and disruptive figure named Qi Yu, a warlord and tribal leader of the Zhuli people. Qi Yu was no ordinary rival. In the mythology, he is portrayed as a monstrous being, sometimes with a bronze head and iron forehead, and often with horns and multiple arms. His body was covered in metal, and his voice was said to sound like thunder. Some legends describe him as having 72 brothers, all equally powerful and fearsome. He was associated with black magic, storms, and chaos. Where Qi Yu went, disorder followed. Qi Yu's ambition was to dominate the tribal world. He led his forces to challenge the Yellow Emperor and his allied tribes, triggering one of the earliest legendary battles in Chinese mythology, the Battle of Zhuolu. The battlefield, located in what is now believed to be the border region between Hebei and Shaanxi provinces, became the site of a mythic confrontation between order and chaos, civilization and brute force. In preparation for the conflict, Huangdi gathered the tribes loyal to him and introduced new innovations to the art of warfare. Among these was the legendary south-pointing chariot, a kind of early navigational device believed to always indicate the southern direction. Though clearly an anachronistic mythic element, the chariot symbolizes the Yellow Emperor's mastery over knowledge, direction, and strategy. As the battle commenced, Qi Yu's forces used fog and storms conjured through sorcery to disorient Huangdi's troops. For a time, the Yellow Emperor's army was lost in the mist, unable to find its bearings. It was then that Huangdi deployed the south-pointing chariot, which allowed his forces to regain their direction and mount a counterattack. The turning point came when the Yellow Emperor called upon the assistance of Yinglong, a divine dragon known for its loyalty and strength. Yinglong used its celestial power to dissipate the fog and unleash rains that neutralized Qi Yu's magic. With the support of this heavenly beast, Huangdi's troops broke through enemy lines and finally captured and executed Qi Yu. The defeat of Qi Yu was more than a military victory. In mythic terms, it represented the triumph of ethical governance over brute strength, of cosmic order over elemental chaos. After the battle, Huangdi established control over the Central Plains, setting the groundwork for the idea of a unified Chinese civilization. His victory at Zhuolu became a foundational myth of Chinese identity. Following the battle, Huangdi is said to have instituted numerous reforms and advancements that furthered the progress of early society. He standardized weights and measures, promoted music, and improved agricultural tools. Under his reign, the people began to live in greater stability and harmony. His wife, Leizu, is credited with discovering how to produce silk by raising silkworms and unwinding their cocoons, a technology that would become one of China's most valuable cultural exports for millennia. Huangdi is also closely associated with the development of traditional Chinese medicine. The Huangdi Neijing, or Inner Canon of the Yellow Emperor, is one of the earliest surviving texts on Chinese medical theory. While it was written many centuries after the Yellow Emperor's supposed reign, it is framed as a dialogue between the emperor and his ministers, showing his enduring role as a source of wisdom and authority. It is important to understand that the Yellow Emperor, like many mythological figures, serves both symbolic and political purposes. In later periods, especially during the Han dynasty, he was elevated as the ancestor of the Han Chinese people. Emperors claimed descent from him to legitimize their rule, and scholars used his legacy to promote ideals of centralized power, moral governance, and technological progress. But the mythology of the Yellow Emperor also persisted outside the elite political sphere. In folk traditions, he became a guardian spirit, a figure prayed to during times of war or national crisis. In Daoist belief systems, he was sometimes viewed as a semi-divine immortal who had mastered the secrets of cosmic harmony and spiritual cultivation. The story of the Battle of Zhuolu also found new interpretations over time. Some accounts viewed Qi Yu not simply as a villain, but as a tragic figure, an emblem of the defeated southern or non-Han tribes who were gradually pushed to the margins of Chinese civilization. In this light, the myth reflects the complexities of early tribal relations and the process of cultural integration and exclusion. Still, the mainstream narrative endures. Huangdi is remembered not for conquest alone, but for what followed: stability, innovation, and a lasting cultural legacy. His example shaped centuries of Chinese political thought. The ideal ruler, according to Confucian and Daoist models alike, was one who led not by fear, but by virtue and wisdom. The Yellow Emperor embodied this model in myth, offering a timeless image of balanced and enlightened leadership. Today, Huangdi remains a potent cultural symbol. His supposed tomb in Huangling County, Shanxi Province, is a site of annual rituals attended by officials and the public alike. He continues to be honored in literature, art, and national ceremonies, not just as a figure of the past, but as a founding ancestor whose story connects millions of people to a shared cultural origin. As myth transitioned toward early proto-history, and as tribes began to unify under the guidance of enlightened rulers like the Yellow Emperor, a new threat loomed, not from hostile tribes or divine monsters, but from nature itself. According to ancient Chinese myth, one of the greatest disasters ever faced by early humanity was a flood that lasted for generations. Rivers burst their banks, farmlands were submerged, and entire villages vanished beneath rising waters. It was not merely a seasonal flood, but a cataclysm so massive and enduring that it threatened the very survival of civilization. This legendary disaster came to be known simply as the Great Flood. While modern scholars have debated the historical reality of such an event, its impact on Chinese mythology and national consciousness is indisputable. Central to this story is the figure of Yu the Great, a culture hero remembered not for divine powers or military conquests, but for his tireless labor, moral determination, and extraordinary contributions to early statecraft and hydraulic engineering. The story of Yu begins with his father, Guan, a figure already known in myth for attempting to control the floodwaters. Guan was appointed by Emperor Yao to manage the crisis, but his efforts failed. According to legend, Guan tried to block the water using a magical substance known as zirang, or self-renewing soil, which could grow on its own and rise endlessly. Despite this enchanted material, his approach, constructing dams and barriers, ultimately proved disastrous. The water continued to rise, overwhelming his fortifications and worsening the devastation. After 9 years of failure, Guan was either executed or exiled, depending on the version of the story, and the task was passed to his son Yu. Here, the myth shifts from fantasy to a more grounded, though still legendary, narrative. Yu is said to have approached the problem not with magic, but with observation, adaptation, and relentless physical labor. Rather than trying to block the waters like his father, Yu proposed to channel them. He began by surveying the entire landscape, mountains, valleys, and river systems. He traveled across the empire, visiting each region to study the natural flow of water. With this knowledge, he designed a network of canals, levees, and dikes that would guide the floodwaters into the sea. This work reportedly took 13 years, during which time Yu passed by his home 3 times without ever stopping, even though his wife had given birth to a son during that period. This detail, Yu passing his house without entering, is one of the most iconic elements of his myth. It symbolizes selflessness and duty to the people over personal comfort. In Confucian tradition, it represents the ideal of public service, placing the welfare of society above one's own family. Yu's method of flood control combined both labor and knowledge. He is said to have led teams of workers, dug channels with his own hands, and relied on tools rather than magic. In some accounts, he enlisted the help of various mythological animals, including dragons and divine turtles, to move earth and redirect rivers. These creatures may symbolize the unpredictable power of nature being brought under human control through wisdom and perseverance. His efforts were ultimately successful. The waters receded, farmlands were restored, and the people could return to their homes. With the flood tamed, Yu's reputation soared. He became not only a national hero, but a model of moral authority. His success in managing the flood also demonstrated the importance of environmental harmony, a key concept in Chinese philosophy. Rather than attempting to dominate nature, Yu worked with it, respecting its patterns and redirecting its force. Because of his unmatched service and integrity, Yu was eventually chosen by Emperor Shun, the last of the 5 emperors, as his successor. This marked a significant moment in Chinese mythic history. The founding of the Xia dynasty, traditionally regarded as the first dynasty in Chinese history, although archaeological evidence for it remains debated. The Xia dynasty is said to have been established by Yu and passed down through his descendants, making Yu not only a hero of flood control, but also a political founder. His rise to power is notable for another reason. It represents a shift from merit-based succession to hereditary monarchy. Previous rulers like Yao and Shun had selected successors based on virtue and ability. Yu, however, passed the throne to his son, Qi, initiating a dynastic system that would dominate Chinese history for millennia. This transition sparked philosophical debate among later scholars. Confucian writers admired Yu's virtue but questioned the wisdom of hereditary succession. Still, Yu's story remained a powerful symbol of responsible governance, environmental stewardship, and civic devotion. Yu's legacy extended beyond myth and legend. In later dynastic periods, emperors traced their legitimacy back to him. Temples were built in his honor, especially near river systems he was believed to have controlled. Rituals were held to commemorate his achievements, particularly during times of drought or flooding, when communities sought to invoke his spirit for protection and guidance. His story also influenced the development of Chinese legal and administrative systems. Yu was often portrayed as a fair and just ruler who balanced local autonomy with central authority. He conducted Yu Gong, or regional surveys, dividing the empire into 9 provinces and assessing the resources, terrain, and needs of each. This tale of administrative division likely reflects early efforts by rulers to impose order on growing populations and diverse landscapes. One version of this account is found in the Book of Documents, Shu Jing, one of the oldest texts in the Chinese literary tradition. In it, Yu delivers a speech outlining his vision for governance based on observation, virtue, and service to the people. Though likely compiled many centuries after his time, these records shaped how later generations viewed both Yu and the responsibilities of rulership. Yu the Great thus occupies a unique place in Chinese mythology. Unlike other heroes, he does not possess supernatural powers or rely on divine intervention. His greatness lies in effort, discipline, and the application of practical knowledge. He represents the triumph of human will and collective action over disaster. His story also carries lessons about leadership. In a world still recovering from chaos, Yu demonstrated that effective governance required more than charisma or birthright. It required listening to the land, responding to the people's needs, and sacrificing personal comfort for the greater good. By the time the floodwaters receded and Yu passed his legacy to the Xia, Chinese mythology had begun to settle into a more structured vision of the world. The sky was repaired, the earth was cultivated, society was organized, and even the wildest rivers had been brought under control. By the time Yu the Great had brought stability to the mortal realm and laid the foundations of dynastic rule, Chinese mythology had already begun to turn its gaze upward. The world of human beings was now organized by social hierarchy, moral order, and regional governance. But what about the divine? If heaven mirrored earth, then surely it too needed structure, responsibility, and leadership. It is at this point in the mythological narrative that the figure of the Jade Emperor, or Yuhuang Dadi, emerges as a central authority in the heavens. Unlike earlier creator gods or culture heroes, the Jade Emperor is portrayed as an administrative ruler of the cosmos, a sovereign not of elemental power, but of divine order. He governs the pantheon, delegates duties to celestial ministers, and presides over the fate of all living beings. In many ways, his celestial bureaucracy reflects the imperial court on earth, forming a symbolic bridge between the divine and mortal realms. The Jade Emperor does not appear in the earliest layers of Chinese mythology. His rise to prominence took place later, during the Tang and especially Song dynasties, when Daoist religious institutions began formalizing the divine order in greater detail. Still, his role in the mythological tradition is indispensable. He embodies a vision of heaven as orderly, hierarchical, and morally governed, an extension of how human society had come to understand power and responsibility. According to legend, the Jade Emperor was once a mortal man. He was born into a noble family and devoted himself entirely to cultivating virtue, kindness, and spiritual discipline. For countless years, he lived a life of simplicity and compassion, showing equal concern for rich and poor, great and small. After enduring numerous trials and performing uncountable acts of benevolence, he attained enlightenment and was elevated to the throne of heaven. Once enthroned, the Jade Emperor began to organize the heavens into departments, ministries, and courts. Each god or spirit was assigned a rank and domain. There were lords of the wind, gods of the rain, spirits of the mountains, and marshals of the stars. Some oversaw natural elements, others governed moral behavior or punished the wicked. Heaven, in this view, functioned much like the imperial bureaucracy of China, with its ministries of war, agriculture, finance, and justice. This system of divine governance did more than provide religious structure. It reinforced a fundamental worldview. Just as emperors ruled the land with the mandate of heaven, so too did the gods operate under a celestial order that rewarded virtue and punished wrongdoing. The moral laws of humanity were thus reflections of cosmic truth, not mere human invention. Among the Jade Emperor's most important roles was the administration of divine justice. Every year, on the eve of the Lunar New Year, it was believed that the Jade Emperor would conduct an annual review of each person's behavior. Based on reports submitted by household deities, especially the kitchen god or Zhaojun, he would determine whether a person deserved good fortune or punishment in the year to come. This concept of annual judgment helped to root celestial authority in daily life. Families performed rituals to appease the kitchen god before he returned to heaven with his report, offering him sweets in hopes he would speak good words on their behalf. Such practices turned cosmic hierarchy into personal ritual and connected households to the rhythms of divine oversight. The Jade Emperor's court also included legendary figures who had once been mortal but were deified due to their extraordinary deeds. For example, the famous General Guan Yin, a historical figure from the late Eastern Han Dynasty, was posthumously elevated to the status of a god of war and justice. In the heavenly bureaucracy, he became a powerful protector of the law and a symbol of loyalty and righteousness. Another well-known figure in the Jade Emperor's domain is Tai Bai Jingxing, the Grand Minister of Heaven, who acts as a celestial envoy. In many folk tales, he is the one sent by the Jade Emperor to carry messages to Earth, intervene in mortal affairs, or test human virtue. These envoys serve as bridges between the heavenly realm and the human world, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all things. Despite his exalted position, the Jade Emperor is not depicted as omnipotent or omniscient. Like earthly rulers, he must rely on reports, make judgments based on evidence, and trust his ministers. At times, he is even deceived by mischievous spirits or overpowered by forces beyond his immediate control. One of the most famous examples of this limitation is found in the legend of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, who once created chaos in heaven and defied the Jade Emperor's authority, a story that will be explored in a later section. Still, the Jade Emperor's importance lies not in supernatural might, but in his embodiment of cosmic order. His rule brings stability to the heavens and provides a model for good governance. Just as Chinese emperors derived their legitimacy from the mandate of heaven, so too did the Jade Emperor's throne represent virtue, balance, and universal harmony. His festival, celebrated on the 9th day of the first lunar month, is still observed in parts of China and Southeast Asia. Worshippers offer incense, fruit, and prayers, asking for health, protection, and blessings. Temples dedicated to the Jade Emperor can be found throughout China, often located atop sacred mountains or near ancient forests, places thought to connect the human world with the celestial. One of the most famous Jade Emperor temples is located at Taishan, the easternmost of the 5 great mountains of China. Pilgrims have traveled to Taishan for centuries to make offerings, perform rites, and seek communion with the divine. The Jade Emperor, perched high in the celestial hierarchy, represents the ultimate authority in both moral and spiritual realms. The rise of the Jade Emperor and the organization of celestial bureaucracy marked a shift in the way Chinese people understood the divine. Rather than imagining heaven as a chaotic domain of competing deities, this new vision placed harmony, accountability, and ethical governance at the center of the cosmos. It also mirrored the development of the Chinese imperial system on Earth. As dynasties like the Tang and Song built complex governments, standardized laws, and formalized ranks, so too did religious thought reshape the heavens into a structured order. Gods became officials, virtue became law, and divine action became administration. The Jade Emperor was not just a mythic figure, he was a symbol of cosmic symmetry. In his realm, as on Earth, everything had its place, its role, and its responsibility. Yet, even in such a tightly managed universe, questions remained. What happens when divine beings rebel? What lies beyond heaven's gates? And what if a mortal, gifted with extraordinary power, refused to obey this celestial order? As Chinese mythology evolved, it did not remain focused solely on creation stories, heroic rulers, or heavenly hierarchies. Over time, it expanded to include a different kind of aspiration, the quest for immortality. In this new phase of mythological development, the divine was no longer limited to heavenly bureaucrats or ancient culture heroes. Instead, a vast tradition emerged that explored how mortals might transcend death, attain enlightenment, and even join the ranks of the divine. This belief system found its fullest expression through Daoism. Daoism, which began as a philosophical tradition in the late Warring States period and matured during the Han Dynasty, introduced new ideas about the cosmos, the self, and the path to harmony. Central to Daoist belief is the concept of the Tao, or the Way, an eternal, ineffable force that underlies all existence. According to Daoist thought, those who align themselves with the Tao can live in harmony with nature, achieve inner peace, and perhaps even prolong life beyond its natural limits. While early Daoist texts, such as the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi, contain abstract reflections on balance, non-action, and simplicity, Daoism also developed a rich mythological layer. This included tales of immortals, legendary alchemists, and mountain sages who mastered the forces of nature and unlocked the secrets of eternal life. These figures were not gods in the traditional sense, nor were they mythic kings. They were often portrayed as once ordinary individuals who attained immortality through discipline, virtue, or divine assistance. This transformation from mortal to immortal was known as Xian, and those who achieved it were referred to as Xianren, or transcendent beings. One of the earliest and most famous of these immortals is Zhang Daoling, a figure from the Eastern Han Dynasty, who is often credited as the founder of religious Daoism. He claimed to receive divine teachings directly from Laozi, the legendary author of the Tao Te Ching, and used these teachings to form a new spiritual community known as the Way of the Celestial Masters. Zhang Daoling and his descendants promoted the belief that individuals could cultivate not only moral character, but also spiritual power that would lead to divine status after death. Over time, stories about immortals became more elaborate. They were said to live on sacred mountains, especially the fabled Mount Kunlun, or the Islands of the Immortals in the Eastern Sea. These places were hidden from ordinary mortals and could only be reached through special knowledge, spiritual purity, or divine favor. Among the most well-known figures in this tradition are the 8 Immortals, or Basian, a group of legendary beings whose stories blend folk mythology, Daoist cosmology, and historical allegory. Each of the 8 Immortals represents a different social type or path to transcendence, making them relatable to a broad range of people. The 8 Immortals are Zhongli Quan, often depicted with a bare chest and a fan that can revive the dead or transmute stone into gold. He represents spiritual wisdom and inner transformation. Lu Dongbin, a scholarly swordsman who embodies the ideal of balancing intellect and martial skill. His sword symbolizes cutting through illusion, and he is often considered the leader of the group. Zhang Guolao, an eccentric old man who rides a white mule backward and carries a bamboo drum. He is associated with alchemical knowledge and unconventional wisdom. He Xianggu, the only female member of the group, known for carrying a lotus flower. She symbolizes purity and is often linked to healing. Li Tieguai, who walks with an iron crutch and carries a gourd filled with medicinal elixirs. He represents compassion and care for the sick and poor. Lan Kaihe, a youthful androgynous figure associated with flowers and spontaneity. Lan represents naturalness and carefree living. Han Xiangzi, a flute-playing musician who brings joy and serenity. He is associated with artistic expression and inner harmony. Tao Guojiu, dressed in court robes and holding castanets, symbolizes political integrity and the moral duty of the elite. These 8 immortals became widely popular during the Song and Yuan dynasties, appearing in paintings, plays, and temple murals. Their stories served both as spiritual allegories and as entertaining tales of triumph over adversity. In each case, the journey to immortality involved overcoming human weakness, whether pride, greed, or doubt, and embracing the deeper truths of the Tao. Daoist immortality was not simply a spiritual concept. It was also pursued through physical practices, particularly through internal alchemy and external alchemy. External alchemy involved the creation of elixirs, usually composed of minerals and herbs, that were believed to grant immortality. These potions were often dangerous, and some emperors and seekers died from mercury poisoning or other side effects. Still, the pursuit of the elixir of life continued for centuries, especially during the Han and Tang dynasties. Internal alchemy, by contrast, focused on cultivating the body and spirit through meditation, breath control, sexual discipline, and dietary restriction. Practitioners sought to refine their internal energies, Kai, Jing, and Shen, to transform the physical body into a spiritual one capable of ascending to the heavens. These practices were often connected with sacred geography. Daoist adepts would retreat to mountains, which were believed to be natural conduits between earth and heaven. Mountains such as Mount Hua, Mount Wudong, and Mount Lu became centers of Daoist practice, pilgrimage, and storytelling. One example of the link between myth and geography is the legend of the Queen Mother of the West, or Si Wangmu. She was said to dwell on Mount Kunlun and possess the peaches of immortality, which ripened once every 3,000 years. In some stories, immortals would gather at her palace to celebrate and partake in these sacred fruits. She appears in texts as early as the Han dynasty and is often depicted with a fierce countenance, riding a phoenix and ruling over a paradise of transcendence. The idea of joining the immortals, rather than merely worshipping the gods, appealed deeply to both the elite and common people. It democratized the spiritual journey, suggesting that anyone, regardless of status, could potentially transcend mortality through right living and spiritual cultivation. This democratization of transcendence also blurred the line between myth and history. Some individuals who lived notable lives were later deified and included among the immortals. Conversely, some immortals were retroactively given biographical details to place them within historical frameworks. This fluid boundary enriched the mythological landscape and allowed Taoism to remain flexible, diverse, and adaptive. During the Tang dynasty, Daoist myths about immortals coexisted alongside Buddhist tales of bodhisattvas and Confucian ideals of righteous governance. Rather than contradicting each other, these traditions often overlapped. A person might worship the Jade Emperor, revere Guan Yin, and still aspire to become an immortal. This syncretic approach is one of the defining features of Chinese religious and mythological life. The stories of the immortals, their journeys, and their trials all point toward a central question: can human beings rise above their limitations? The answer offered by Daoist mythology is yes, but only through patience, purity, and harmony with the Tao. The rise of the immortals and the flourishing of alchemical lore mark a significant shift in Chinese mythology. No longer focused solely on cosmic events or dynastic founders, mythology now turned inward, to the body, the breath, and the spirit. While Daoist immortals sought to transcend the limits of the body and live forever among the clouds and peaks, most people in ancient China lived with a more sobering expectation: that death was inevitable, and what came after was not a paradise, but a bureaucracy. In Chinese mythology, the afterlife is not governed by angels or eternal torment, but by courts, officials, and paperwork. This is the realm known as Diyu, the Chinese underworld, a place of judgment, punishment, and eventual renewal. Diyu, often translated as earth prison or hell, does not represent eternal damnation in the Western sense. It is more accurately described as a moral processing center where souls are judged, punished if necessary, and prepared for rebirth. It is influenced by both Daoist cosmology and Buddhist karmic doctrine, resulting in a highly detailed and evolving vision of the afterlife that reflects Chinese ideas of justice, responsibility, and cosmic balance. At the heart of Du is the Court of the Ten Kings, or Shidian Yanwang. These are 10 powerful judges who preside over different stages of the soul's journey after death. The soul, or Hun, does not go directly to judgment. Instead, it is led into the underworld by guardians, most famously the demonic but dutiful duo known as Oxhead and Horseface. These two fearsome figures appear at the moment of death to escort the soul to the first court. Once in Du, the soul begins a journey through a series of 10 courts, each governed by a king of hell or Yanluo Wang. These kings are not necessarily evil or cruel. They are agents of divine justice, upholding the moral laws of the universe. Their courts examine the deeds of the deceased, comparing them against the Book of Life and Death, a divine register maintained by the underworld bureaucracy. Every person's actions, good and bad, are recorded, tallied, and judged. Each court deals with different types of offenses and metes out corresponding punishments. For example, the first court, ruled by Qin Guang Wang, determines whether the soul has committed serious crimes or can be swiftly reincarnated. Lesser offenders may be sent for minor corrections, while more serious cases are passed along to subsequent courts. In later courts, punishments grow harsher. Sinners may be boiled in cauldrons, frozen in ice, dismembered by demons, or forced to walk across mountains of knives. These torments are not eternal, but are symbolic representations of karmic correction. Once the soul has served its sentence, it is allowed to proceed to the Bridge of Forgetfulness, where it drinks a potion to erase all memory of its past life and is then reborn into the world. Despite the grisly details, the underworld is not portrayed as a place of pure evil. Its structure and procedures reflect Chinese legal philosophy, where justice must be firm but fair, and where punishment is ultimately a means to restore order. Many versions of the Du myth emphasize rehabilitation over retribution. The system ensures that no sin goes unaccounted for and no virtue is ignored. The 10 kings themselves are often portrayed as former humans who were deified after proving their moral worth. Some even bear historical names, linking the divine with the human and making the idea of justice both cosmic and relatable. Over time, these kings became the focus of local temple cults, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, where they were venerated not only as judges of the dead, but as protectors of moral order. One of the most significant figures in the underworld is Yanluo Wang, sometimes identified as the king of the fifth court, though in other traditions he oversees the entire system. His name derives from Yama, the Indian god of death introduced through Buddhism. As Chinese Buddhism merged with Daoist and folk beliefs, Yanluo Wang was reimagined as a stern but impartial judge, seated in a court filled with scrolls, mirrors, and spirit clerks. Another key element of Du is the Mirror of Retribution, which stands at the entrance of the first court. This magical mirror forces each soul to witness the full truth of its actions in life, stripping away excuses and illusions. In this way, judgment is not imposed blindly. It is understood and internalized by the soul itself. The layout of Du is highly structured and reflects the belief that morality is measurable. There are charts, scrolls, ledgers, and officials for every function, much like an imperial bureaucracy. This legalistic vision of the afterlife mirrors the structure of earthly governance, where officials maintain order through law, documentation, and ritual. The influence of the underworld myth extended into popular religion and local festivals. One of the most important is the Ghost Festival, held on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, when the gates of Du are believed to open, allowing spirits to visit the human world. Families burn offerings of paper money, clothing, and food to aid their ancestors in the underworld. These offerings reflect both devotion and a practical concern for the spiritual welfare of the dead. Temples dedicated to the 10 kings, or to Yanluo Wang, became common in many regions of China. Some temples featured elaborate dioramas and statues depicting the punishments of the underworld, serving as vivid moral reminders for the living. These visual representations acted as both religious instruction and social commentary, reinforcing the idea that no action, however hidden, escapes cosmic accountability. Beyond the 10 courts, mythology also includes special paths for exceptional souls. The righteous, for instance, might bypass Du entirely and ascend to heavenly realms. The truly wicked, however, might be reincarnated as animals or cast into a hell reserved for liars, traitors, or abusers. Even suicide, in some traditions, led to a special tribunal that investigated the soul's motives and circumstances, acknowledging the complexity of moral life. One of the most touching features of Du myth is the presence of family bonds, even in death. Some stories tell of devoted children descending into the underworld to plead for their parents' release, a theme reflecting the Confucian value of filial piety. Others describe ancestors appearing in dreams to request additional offerings or prayers to reduce their sentence. These narratives underscore the deep continuity between the living and the dead in Chinese thought. Though often frightening in imagery, the underworld in Chinese mythology is fundamentally a system of moral correction. It is not governed by arbitrary gods, but by rules, ledgers, and rituals. Its purpose is not eternal suffering, but the eventual reintegration of the soul into the cycle of life. Through punishment, purification, and rebirth, the system promises restoration. By the time a soul drinks the Mung Po soup at the Bridge of Forgetfulness and returns to the mortal world in a new form, it is believed to have left behind the weight of its sins, ready to try again. In this sense, the underworld completes the cycle of life, death, and rebirth that underlies much of Chinese cosmology. With this moral universe established, Chinese mythology was prepared to explore even deeper relationships between nature and spirit. While the underworld managed the dead and the Jade Emperor ruled the heavens, the world itself, its mountains, rivers, animals, and seasons, became animated with their own spiritual essence. In Chinese mythology, the divine is not confined to the heavens above or the underworld below. It also moves through forests, rivers, mountains, and skies. The world of animals, both real and imagined, has long been seen as a realm of spiritual power, moral symbolism, and cosmic meaning. Unlike Western traditions that often separate humans from nature, Chinese myth views animals as intelligent forces, capable of divine transformation, communication, and even governance. These beings are not merely background characters, they are central to the mythological landscape. The foundation for this worldview lies in the early animist beliefs of ancient China. Before formal religious structures developed, early communities already believed that animals, stones, trees, and natural formations possessed spirits, or Shen. This belief system did not vanish with the rise of Taoism, Confucianism, or Buddhism. Instead, it was absorbed and reinterpreted, allowing animal spirits to thrive in every corner of Chinese mythology. Among the most important mythological creatures are the four symbols, or Xixiang, celestial beasts that correspond to the four cardinal directions and represent key aspects of the cosmos. Each one holds enormous symbolic weight, appearing in texts, rituals, art, and imperial iconography. In the East, the azure dragon, or Qinglong, reigns supreme. It is the symbol of spring, renewal, and growth. The azure dragon is often seen as a protector and is associated with imperial authority. Unlike the destructive dragons of Western lore, Chinese dragons are almost universally benevolent, seen as bringers of rain, fertility, and power. The azure dragon's rise in spring marks the return of life after winter's rest, and its image adorned imperial robes and palace architecture as a symbol of legitimate rule. In the south lies the vermilion bird, or zhuke, a fiery phoenix-like creature representing summer, fire, and the element of transformation. It is known for its elegance, grace, and moral refinement. The vermilion bird is associated with beauty, poetry, and spiritual ascension. It appears often in funerary art and Daoist alchemical texts, where fire is both a destroyer and a purifier. To the west, one finds the white tiger, or Baihu, the fiercest of the four symbols. This creature embodies autumn and the metal element, signifying strength, righteousness, and military power. In ancient Chinese military tradition, the tiger was a symbol of authority on the battlefield. Generals were granted tiger tallies to command troops in the emperor's name. The white tiger's presence in mythology underscores the idea that power must be disciplined and just. In the north, the black tortoise, or Xuanwu, often shown entwined with a serpent, represents winter, water, and endurance. It is the guardian of the cold, dark, and mysterious forces of nature. Unlike the more aggressive symbolism of the other animals, the black tortoise emphasizes longevity, protection, and hidden strength. Its association with the serpent also represents the union of opposites: hard shell and soft body, stillness and movement. In Daoist temples, Xuanwu is revered as a powerful deity who protects the faithful from harm. Together, these four creatures form a cosmic map. They are not simply animals, but mythic expressions of time, space, and energy. Each is tied to a direction, season, element, and moral value, forming a complex symbolic system that permeates Chinese thought. Their stories do not always appear in linear narrative form. Rather, they live in iconography, cosmological charts, temple walls, and the martial arts traditions that align human movement with celestial rhythm. Another central animal in Chinese mythology is the dragon, or Long, not merely the azure dragon of the East, but the broader class of dragons that populate rivers, clouds, and imperial dreams. Dragons are shapeshifters, capable of moving between heaven and earth. They can shrink to the size of a silk thread or expand to fill the sky. In many tales, they live in underwater palaces, rule over aquatic creatures, and control the rain and wind. Dragons often act as guardians of sacred places or treasures. Some are celestial, like the dragon kings of the four seas, each ruling one quadrant of the world's oceans. These dragon kings are often petitioned in rituals for rain, especially during droughts. Temples dedicated to them still exist in parts of China, especially in regions dependent on agriculture and water. The phoenix, or Feng Huang, also plays a key role in myth, especially in later dynastic periods. Unlike the Western phoenix, which is reborn through fire, the Feng Huang is a composite creature, part bird, part dragon, with the features of many noble animals. It symbolizes harmony, virtue, and the union of yin and yang. Often paired with the dragon in imperial art, the phoenix represents the empress to the dragon's emperor, forming a perfect cosmic and political balance. In addition to these cosmic beasts, many ordinary animals also carry spiritual significance in mythology and folklore. The crane, for instance, is a symbol of longevity and transcendence. Daoist immortals are frequently depicted riding cranes into the heavens. Its elegant movements and association with stillness and grace make it a favorite subject in poetry and painting. The fox, especially in northern folklore, is seen as a spirit creature capable of shapeshifting, often into a beautiful woman. Known as the Huli Jing, the fox spirit can be either benevolent or dangerous, depending on the story. In some Buddhist and Daoist tales, the fox seeks enlightenment and even worships the Tao. In others, it is a trickster, seducing or deceiving humans. This duality reflects the belief that spiritual power can be used for good or ill, depending on intention. The tiger, aside from its role as the white tiger of the West, also features in many folk stories as a demon slayer and protector. Images of tigers are often placed on children's clothing, doorways, or charms to ward off evil. In mythology, tigers embody bravery, protection, and martial virtue. The tortoise, beyond its role in the black tortoise constellation, is an emblem of wisdom and long life. Its slow, deliberate movements and long lifespan make it a frequent symbol in Daoist thought. It also serves as the foundation of the Luoshu magic square, an ancient numerical diagram said to have been found on a tortoise's back rising from the Luo River, a tale often linked to Fuxi's creation of the trigrams. The rabbit, particularly the jade rabbit, occupies a special place in lunar mythology. According to legend, the rabbit lives on the moon, pounding herbs with a mortar and pestle to make the elixir of immortality. It accompanies Chang'e, the moon goddess, and appears in mid-autumn festival stories. The rabbit is a gentle symbol associated with purity, kindness, and the mystery of the moon. Many animals also serve as spirit intermediaries. They appear in dreams, act as omens, or deliver divine messages. Snakes, for example, can symbolize hidden knowledge or danger. Bats, whose name Fu sounds like the word for good fortune, are considered lucky symbols, often appearing in decorative art. In Chinese temples, especially those dedicated to local deities or ancestral spirits, it is common to find depictions of these animals. Their presence reflects not only mythological tradition, but also feng shui, the art of harmonizing space with cosmic forces. A dragon sculpture might face east to welcome vitality, while a tiger painting guards the western wall. The integration of animal symbolism into everyday life, through festivals, clothing, architecture, and literature, demonstrates how deeply myth shapes the Chinese view of the world. Animals are not separate from humans. They are companions, teachers, and sometimes judges. They reveal nature's secrets and remind people of their place within a larger cosmic pattern. This harmony with the natural world forms one of the most distinctive features of Chinese mythology. It teaches that spiritual insight is not achieved by withdrawing from nature, but by engaging with it, by watching the crane in flight, listening to the tiger's roar, or tracing the dragon's path through the clouds. As Chinese mythology matured, it extended beyond stories of gods, heroes, and spirits to encompass one of the most enduring and universally recognized systems of symbolic time, the Chinese zodiac. This celestial calendar, based on cycles of animals and elements, did more than measure years. It became a map for understanding fate, personality, and harmony between the human world and the cosmos. The Chinese zodiac is part of a larger calendrical system that combines astronomy, numerology, and mythology. Its origins trace back over 2,000 years, with early references appearing during the Warring States period, and the system itself becoming widely adopted during the Han Dynasty. At its core is a repeating 12-year cycle, with each year associated with a specific animal. These animals are not chosen randomly. Each one carries deep symbolic meaning drawn from folklore, cosmology, and everyday life. The 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac in order are rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, and pig. Together, they represent a full cycle of life and behavior, each with distinct attributes believed to influence those born under their sign. But before the system was formalized, mythology offered an explanation for how these animals came to occupy their positions in the zodiac. One of the most beloved stories tells of a great race, organized by the Jade Emperor. In this tale, the emperor wanted to measure time and decided to create a calendar based on 12 animals. He invited all creatures to compete in a race across a river. The first 12 to reach the finish line would be honored by having a year named after them. The rat, clever and resourceful, came in first, not through strength or speed, but through cunning. It had convinced the ox, steady and strong, to carry it across the river. Just as the ox was about to cross the finish line, the rat leapt from its back and claimed first place. The ox, humble and dutiful, came in second without protest. Next came the tiger, who fought the current with power and determination. The rabbit arrived fourth, having cleverly hopped across stepping stones and driftwood. The dragon, despite its ability to fly, only came in fifth because it stopped to create rain for farmers and to help others along the way, earning admiration but costing valuable time. The snake, quiet and cunning, surprised everyone by hiding in the horse's hoof and slithering out near the end, startling the horse and taking sixth place. The horse finished seventh, followed by the goat, monkey, and rooster, who helped each other by working as a team to cross the river on a raft. Their cooperation earned them the 8th, 9th, and 10th spots. The dog, though an excellent swimmer, arrived 11th because it had stopped to play and bathe in the water. The pig, kind and plump, came last after pausing to eat and nap along the way. This story is more than a whimsical legend. Each animal's placement and behavior in the race reflects traits that are then associated with those born in their corresponding years. For example, people born in the year of the rat are considered clever and ambitious. Those born under the ox are seen as diligent and patient. Tigers are brave, but sometimes impulsive, while rabbits are gentle and cautious. the zodiac system is not limited to just animals. It is woven into a more complex structure that includes the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and the yin-yang duality. Each year is influenced by a combination of animal, element, and yin or yang energy. This results in a 60-year cycle, where each year has a unique energetic profile. For example, someone born in the year of the fire dragon might be considered more passionate and intense than a water dragon, who is more introspective and adaptable. This layering allows for detailed personality readings and predictions, contributing to the richness of Chinese astrology. The zodiac also plays a crucial role in fortune-telling, compatibility analysis, and ritual planning. Auspicious dates for weddings, business openings, and travel are often selected based on the interaction between zodiac signs and the year's element. Parents may consult fortune tellers to determine whether a newborn's sign is in harmony with the family's ancestral signs or the energy of the home. Even in modern times, the zodiac continues to shape social behavior. For instance, the year of the dragon is seen as highly auspicious, leading to a surge in births as families hope to have strong, successful children. Conversely, the year of the tiger is sometimes viewed as too aggressive, especially for female births, prompting debates and adjustments in some traditional communities. Zodiac signs also play a role in popular culture, literature, and moral education. Children learn the traits of the animals through fables and stories that teach values such as cooperation, as seen with the monkey, rooster, and goat, humility, from the ox, or generosity, as shown by the dragon. In addition to yearly cycles, the zodiac influences daily and hourly cycles. Each day is divided into 12 two-hour periods, each ruled by one of the zodiac animals. This system, called the earthly branches, assigns symbolic importance to time itself. For example, the hour of the rat, from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., is considered a time of renewal and energy, reflecting the rat's active nature. The zodiac also connects with medical theory in traditional Chinese medicine. Each animal is associated with certain body parts, organs, or energetic patterns. Understanding a person's zodiac sign may guide recommendations for diet, lifestyle, or treatment based on the seasonal and elemental influences of that sign. Temples and festivals celebrate the zodiac with special reverence. During Lunar New Year, decorations featuring the animal of the year appear in homes, shops, and public spaces. Families offer prayers and make offerings to welcome the new animal spirit and to seek protection and prosperity. Children receive red envelopes with money, sometimes stamped with images of the year's zodiac animal for luck and blessing. The symbolism of the zodiac extends into architecture and urban planning as well. In some traditional cities, gates or districts were aligned according to animal symbolism and cardinal direction. These alignments were believed to influence the spiritual flow, or kui, of the environment. In folk religion, certain animals are believed to have spiritual guardianship roles. For example, the dog is often considered a guardian against evil spirits, while the rooster, with its early crowing, is thought to ward off demons by announcing the dawn. These beliefs reflect an ongoing integration of zodiac symbolism into daily life and spiritual practice. Over the centuries, the Chinese zodiac has maintained a unique status. It is at once a calendar, a cosmic map, and a moral compass. It explains not only when one is born, but how one is expected to act, love, work, and age. It merges myth and measurement, offering a system where time is not a straight line, but a circle, ever repeating and evolving. Its endurance across dynasties, cultures, and even borders, spreading to Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and beyond, is a testament to its universality. Though the 12 animals may vary slightly by culture, the core concept remains. Time is alive, and every year brings with it a new face, a new energy, and a new lesson. One of the most famous and enduring contributions to Chinese mythology is not merely a story of gods, beasts, or cosmic cycles. It is a journey across deserts, mountains, and haunted lands. A journey guided by divine intervention, disrupted by demons, and led by one of the most iconic figures in all of Chinese literature, the Monkey King, or Sun Wukong. His story comes from Journey to the West, a 16th century novel attributed to Wu Chenggen, though it draws heavily on older religious traditions, folktales, and oral legends. Though technically a literary work, Journey to the West is saturated with mythological depth and has become a canonical part of the Chinese mythological universe. It represents a confluence of Daoist, Buddhist, and folk traditions, combining philosophy with entertainment, theology with adventure. The novel centers around a real historical event, the pilgrimage of the monk Xuanzang, also known as Tang Sanzang, who traveled from China to India during the 7th century to retrieve sacred Buddhist scriptures. Over time, this journey became the framework for an epic fantasy filled with gods, monsters, and moral lessons. Xuanzang was mythologized into a noble monk chosen by the Buddha to journey west and bring back true teachings. To assist and protect him on this perilous path, he is assigned 3 powerful and deeply flawed disciples, each of whom is on a journey of redemption. The most famous of these is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. According to legend, Sun Wukong was born from a stone egg, formed from the essence of heaven and earth atop the mountain of flowers and fruit. From the moment of his birth, he displayed supernatural abilities. He quickly declared himself king of the monkeys and sought immortality. Driven by curiosity and ambition, he studied Daoist magic, mastered 72 transformations, and learned to travel vast distances with a single somersault. But it was not enough. Sun Wukong's hunger for power and recognition led him to heaven, where he demanded a position among the gods. At first, the Jade Emperor offered him a lowly post in the heavenly stables, hoping to appease him without granting real authority. Sun Wukong accepted until he learned of the trick. Enraged by the insult, he returned to heaven and declared himself the great sage equal to heaven, seizing a title by force. This sparked a celestial crisis. The gods tried to restrain him, but he proved too powerful. Even the armies of heaven could not subdue him. Eventually, the Buddha intervened. Tricking Sun Wukong into leaping into his palm, the Buddha transformed his hand into a mountain, trapping the monkey underneath. There, Sun Wukong remained imprisoned for 500 years, with only a seal on his forehead and a sense of growing humility. His release came only when Tang Sanzang's pilgrimage began. Chosen by the Buddha as one of the monk's protectors, Sun Wukong was freed under one condition. He must wear a magical headband, which would tighten and cause pain whenever he disobeyed. This restraint symbolized his need to master his impulses and submit to a higher path. The journey itself spans countless episodes, each rich in symbolism. Along the way, the group faces demons, spirits, false Buddhas, shape-shifting monsters, and even challenges from the gods. The dangers they encounter are not random. They reflect the spiritual obstacles and moral temptations that must be overcome on the path to enlightenment. Each companion on this journey brings a different weakness and lesson. Zhu Baji, often called Pigsy, was once a celestial general who was banished to Earth for lechery. In his current form, he is part man, part pig, gluttonous and lazy, but also humorous and loyal. He represents indulgence and earthly desire. Sha Wu Jing, or Sandy, is a former water spirit who was cast out of heaven for breaking a precious vase. Quiet, humble, and dependable, he symbolizes patience and endurance, carrying the monk's luggage and protecting the group without complaint. Together with Sun Wukong and Tang Sanzang, these figures form a complete spiritual spectrum, from raw desire to disciplined virtue. Their interactions offer a tapestry of Chinese thought, merging Buddhist ideals of self-discipline and karmic consequence with Daoist ideas of inner cultivation and transformation. Sun Wukong, in particular, evolves through the journey. He begins as rebellious and proud, but over time, he becomes wiser, more compassionate, and more self-controlled. His growth reflects the central Buddhist idea that enlightenment comes not from suppressing the self, but from refining it. The journey to the West is often read as an allegory of the human experience, The path is long and filled with suffering, but the destination, spiritual truth, is worth every hardship. The characters are not simply companions on a physical trek. They are embodiments of internal struggle. The monk's purity, the monkey's restlessness, the pig's desire, and the sand demon's steadiness each reflect dimensions of the human condition. Throughout the journey, the group encounters various deities from across China's mythological and religious traditions. Guan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, plays a crucial role, guiding and intervening when needed. Daoist immortals appear as both allies and challengers. The Jade Emperor and Buddha preside over cosmic decisions, showing the blended religious worldview that defines much of Chinese mythology. The story's popularity grew during the Ming Dynasty when it was first published as a novel, but its elements had circulated in plays, folklore, and temple art for centuries. Its enduring appeal lies in its flexibility. It is both adventure and allegory, comedy and doctrine, myth and moral guide. In modern times, Sun Wukong has become a global icon. He appears in operas, films, comics, and video games. His rebellious nature and supernatural abilities make him appealing across cultures, yet his deeper journey, from arrogance to humility, from chaos to discipline, keeps him grounded in traditional values. The journey to the West bridges the worlds of gods and humans, discipline and desire, laughter and wisdom. It shows that mythology is not just about cosmic beginnings or distant heavens, but also about the inner path, the spiritual pilgrimage each person must undertake to face their demons, understand their nature, and seek higher truth. As Tang Sanzang and his companions reach the Thunder Monastery in the West and retrieve the sacred scriptures, they return not only with texts, but with transformation. Each has earned redemption through hardship and service. Sun Wukong, once a trickster and rebel, becomes a Buddha of victory through struggle. This transformation is the heart of Chinese mythic storytelling, that chaos can become order, that even flawed beings can find harmony, and that the path to truth lies not in escape from the world, but in journeying through it with purpose. In the vast landscape of Chinese mythology, few figures hold as deep and enduring a place in the hearts of believers as Guan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion. Often referred to as the goddess of mercy, Guan Yin's presence can be found in temples, homes, shrines, and prayer scrolls across East Asia. Her gentle image, standing or seated on a lotus, gazing downward with serenity and kindness, has become one of the most recognizable symbols of spiritual solace. But Guan Yin's story is one of profound transformation, of spiritual evolution, religious adaptation, and cultural integration. She is a mythological figure shaped not by a single origin, but by centuries of devotion and reinterpretation. And at the heart of her story lies a unique development in Chinese religious history, the feminization of divine compassion. Guan Yin is originally derived from the Sanskrit name Avalokiteshvara, meaning the Lord who looks down with compassion. Avalokiteshvara is a major bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism, revered as the embodiment of infinite mercy and often depicted as male in early Indian and Central Asian art. In the early centuries of Buddhism's arrival in China, during the Han Dynasty, Avalokiteshvara was introduced through Buddhist scriptures, statues, and monastic teachings as a male bodhisattva who heard the cries of the suffering and vowed to save all sentient beings. Over time, however, something remarkable happened. By the Tang Dynasty, and increasingly during the Song Dynasty, Avalokiteshvara began to be depicted in female form. This change was not mandated by doctrine, but grew organically from popular devotion. In Chinese culture, the concept of compassion began to take on maternal qualities. The idea of a being who would listen to the cries of the world, who would shelter the suffering and heal the brokenhearted, naturally resonated with images of motherhood and nurturing. As a result, Guan Yin became identified not just with mercy, but with the ideal mother, a figure who comforts, forgives, and never turns away from those in need. This shift reflects a broader trend in Chinese religious life. While formal Buddhist texts maintained Avalokiteshvara's masculine identity, folk religion, oral storytelling, and popular literature embraced the feminine Guan Yin. She became the divine protector of women, children, fishermen, travelers, and anyone lost or in pain. One of the most beloved stories that cemented this transformation is the legend of Princess Miao Shan. According to the tale, Miao Shan was the youngest daughter of a cruel and selfish king. From a young age, she was deeply drawn to spiritual practice and the alleviation of suffering. Her father, desiring political alliances through marriage, ordered her to wed. Miao Shan refused, stating that she wished to become a nun and devote her life to compassion. Enraged by her disobedience, the king subjected her to harsh punishments, sending her to a convent where she was given the most grueling tasks, hoping she would abandon her faith. Instead, Miao Shan performed every chore with joy and kindness. Miraculously, the convent's animals helped her with her work, and the tools never broke in her hands. The king, seeing that hardship had failed, ordered her execution, yet even death could not stop her. She descended into the underworld, where her light and compassion transformed the realm of the dead. Moved by her purity, the spirits sent her back to life. Later, when the king fell ill with a mysterious disease, he was told he could only be healed by a medicine made from the eye and arm of someone willing to give them freely. Miao Shan, now living in obscurity on a mountain, heard of his suffering and offered her body parts without hesitation. The king recovered and sought to thank his unknown benefactor, only to discover it was his own daughter. Overwhelmed with remorse, he begged for forgiveness, and Miao Shan revealed her true form as Guan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion. This story became deeply embedded in popular consciousness. It emphasized Guan Yin's selflessness, her connection to filial piety, a core Confucian value, and her willingness to forgive even the most grievous wrongs. It also solidified her role as a divine intercessor, someone who stands between the suffering of the world and the unreachable heights of the divine. Guan Yin's iconography evolved alongside her legend. While Avalokiteshvara was once depicted with 1,000 arms and 11 heads, symbols of his ability to see and reach all who suffer, Guan Yin often appears as a slender, white-robed woman holding a vase of pure water and a willow branch. The water symbolizes healing, and the willow, with its flexibility and resilience, represents grace under pressure. In other depictions, she is shown with a child in her arms, leading many to associate her with the Madonna figure in Christianity, though the development is entirely independent. In rural China, women prayed to Guan Yin for sons, safe childbirth, and the protection of children. In coastal regions, she became a goddess of the sea, guiding sailors through storms and rescuing shipwrecked souls. Guan Yin also became known for her manifestations. She was said to take any form necessary to reach those in need: a fisherman to a drowning sailor, a beggar to a wealthy merchant, a mother to an orphan. This idea, rooted in Buddhist scripture, made her accessible to all people, regardless of class, gender, or background. Temples dedicated to Guan Yin are among the most numerous in China and throughout East Asia. Some of the most famous include Mount Putuo, one of the 4 sacred mountains of Chinese Buddhism, where Guan Yin is said to have appeared to devotees. Pilgrims journey to the island to seek blessings, offer prayers, and experience the serene beauty that surrounds her sacred sites. Guan Yin's influence also expanded far beyond China. In Japan, she is known as Canon. In Korea, as Guan Yum. In Vietnam, as Quan Am. In each culture, she retains her association with mercy, healing, and compassion, though local customs shape her image and rituals. Across languages and landscapes, her message remains consistent. No cry is too small, no suffering too hidden. In literature and performance, Guan Yin appears frequently as a guide or savior. In Journey to the West, it is Guan Yin who recommends Sun Wukong to aid Tang Sanzong, and she appears repeatedly to restore balance when the journey falters. She does not wield a sword or ride into battle. Her power lies in presence, listening, and intervening when all else fails. Guan Yin's rise to prominence also reflects the syncretic nature of Chinese mythology. As Buddhism adapted to Chinese cultural norms and as Taoism and folk beliefs absorbed her image, she became a unifying figure, respected across sects and traditions. In her, people saw not only divine compassion, but the embodiment of what it meant to be human, to suffer, to forgive, and to love without condition. Her legacy continues into the present. Statues of Guan Yin stand in parks, monasteries, and public squares. Her name is invoked in times of fear, grief, or hope. For many, she is not just a figure from the past, but a living presence, a source of comfort in an uncertain world. As Guan Yin's myth solidified, it also helped reshape the gender dynamics of Chinese religious imagery. She became a model not of obedience or submission, but of resilient compassion, a woman who endured suffering, stood firm in her values, and transformed cruelty with forgiveness. In a pantheon often dominated by warriors, kings, and cosmic judges, Guan Yin brought a gentler force into balance, one that saves not through conquest, but through grace. As Chinese civilization advanced through dynastic change, conquest, and cultural consolidation, mythology did not remain fixed in oral tradition or temple folklore. Instead, it entered a new phase, one defined by systematic preservation, reinterpretation, and integration into official historical and philosophical frameworks. This period saw the elevation of myth into a structured worldview that aligned with political authority, moral philosophy, and state ritual. The dynasties that ruled China, particularly the Han, Tang, and Song, played a critical role in shaping which myths endured, which were rewritten, and how divine figures were understood within the empire's evolving identity. The process of codification began in earnest during the Han dynasty, which lasted from the 2nd century BCE to the 2nd century CE. The Han court, particularly under Emperor Wu of Han, actively supported Confucianism as the guiding ideology of the state. Yet, even as Confucianism became the official doctrine, Daoist and folk beliefs remained powerful among the population. Rather than suppress these traditions, the Han intellectual elite began to systematize them, collecting myths, reinterpreting deities, and aligning spiritual narratives with Confucian ideals of virtue, order, and social harmony. One of the most important outcomes of this process was the incorporation of mythological figures into imperial legitimacy. The rulers of the Han dynasty traced their ancestry back to legendary sages like the Yellow Emperor and Emperor Yao, asserting that their own right to rule was rooted in the same divine pattern. This was not mere propaganda. It reflected a genuine belief in the mandate of heaven, the idea that heaven conferred authority upon rulers who upheld moral order. If a dynasty failed in its duties, heaven would withdraw its favor, resulting in rebellion or collapse. To support this cosmological view, scholars compiled detailed cosmogonies or creation theories that blended mythology with early metaphysics. One of the most influential texts was the Huainanzi, a Han-era philosophical treatise that presents a Taoist-influenced vision of the universe, complete with descriptions of deities, cosmic forces, and mythical geography. The Huainanzi was not a storybook. It was a state-sponsored text intended to articulate the structure of the cosmos in a way that supported governance. Myths were also preserved through ritual manuals, historical chronicles, and encyclopedic compilations. The great historian Sima Qian, in his monumental work Records of the Grand Historian, Shiji, included accounts of legendary emperors and mythological episodes alongside political events. For the first time, mythology was written into a historical framework, not merely as fanciful tales, but as the deep cultural memory of the Chinese people. During the Tang dynasty, mythology experienced a flourishing of literary and religious expression. The Tang period, which lasted from the 7th to the 10th century, was a time of openness, international exchange, and artistic innovation. It was also a golden age for Buddhism, which influenced the way myths were told, visualized, and integrated into everyday life. Under Tang rule, Daoist and Buddhist cosmologies were not in conflict. Instead, they were often syncretized, resulting in texts, rituals, and images that merged gods from different traditions. A Daoist immortal might appear in a Buddhist sutra. A Buddhist bodhisattva might be honored in a Daoist temple. The lines between myth and religion, between story and state, became increasingly fluid. This era also saw the rise of local cults and regional deities. As imperial infrastructure improved and literacy expanded, people across the empire began recording the legends of their own towns, mountains, rivers, and heroes. These stories were compiled into gazetteers, temple records, and court documents. In many cases, a local god would be granted an official title by the emperor, often in response to a perceived miracle, a dream, or the god's aid in military or natural crises. For example, a small village might pray to a mountain god during a drought. If rain came shortly after, the local magistrate could report the event to higher authorities. In some instances, the emperor himself might recognize the god's efficacy by issuing an imperial edict elevating its status, often with a title like Protector of the Southern Rivers or Divine Guardian of the Harvest. In this way, myth became part of the imperial bureaucracy. The Song dynasty, which followed the Tang, continued this process with even greater intensity. The Song court was particularly invested in cataloging and moralizing myth. Scholars produced massive encyclopedias of gods, spirits, rituals, and strange phenomena. One of the most famous works from this period is the Taiping Guangji, a vast anthology of mythic and supernatural stories compiled under imperial order. What made the Song period unique was its emphasis on moral didacticism. Myths were now interpreted not only for their narrative value, but for their ability to teach proper behavior. Stories of filial piety, loyalty, humility, and sacrifice were promoted through temples, festivals, and schools. Gods who punished the wicked and rewarded the virtuous became more prominent, aligning myth with the state's moral education program. Another development during this time was the integration of mythology into visual culture. Wall paintings in temples, stone carvings, and printed woodblock illustrations helped make myths accessible to the illiterate population. In marketplaces and religious festivals, ritual dramas and puppet performances brought to life the stories of Guan Yin, Neja, the 8 immortals, and countless local gods. Myth became performative and public, reinforcing community values and shared cosmologies. Dynasties also contributed to the standardization of temples. Throughout the empire, certain deities were recognized officially, and their cults were regulated by state-appointed priests or temple registries. Yet popular belief continued to adapt and reinterpret these figures. In this dynamic tension between state and people, mythology proved incredibly resilient, always able to reflect, resist, or reinforce the dominant political order. The process of codification also led to the elevation of human figures to divine status. Famous generals, scholars, and even loyal ministers were posthumously transformed into gods. Their stories were mythologized to reflect moral virtues or miraculous deeds. One well-known example is Guan Yin, a general from the Three Kingdoms period, who became worshipped as a god of war, loyalty, and righteousness. His cult expanded so widely that even Daoist and Buddhist temples included his image on their altars. In this way, mythology not only preserved ancient narratives, it absorbed history, turning real events into symbolic models of virtue and failure. The line between myth and reality became increasingly porous, with mythology shaping historical memory and history being retold through the language of myth. By the end of the Song dynasty, China had developed a multi-layered mythological system. It included cosmological deities like the Jade Emperor, moral exemplars like Guan Yin, rebellious tricksters like Sun Wukong, and countless regional spirits tied to mountains, rivers, and ancestors. These figures were cataloged, ranked, and worshipped according to systems that combined state authority with grassroots devotion. This process of mythic standardization did not flatten belief. It enriched it. Mythology became a shared language that allowed emperors and villagers, monks and merchants, scholars and farmers to engage with the same stories, even if they interpreted them differently. As imperial China moved forward, and as dynasties rose and fell, the system of codified myth continued to evolve. But beneath the layers of state approval and scholarly commentary, the pulse of folk belief remained strong. In villages and kitchens, among farmers and travelers, new stories were still being told, and old stories were being reshaped to meet the needs of everyday life. As Chinese mythology became codified in imperial texts, temple hierarchies, and official cults, it simultaneously continued to evolve in another equally powerful direction, at the grassroots level. Far from the palaces and scholar officials of the dynasties, ordinary people in towns, villages, and remote rural communities maintained and reshaped their own folk religious traditions. These practices often existed outside official sanction, yet they formed the living heart of Chinese religious life, filling homes, markets, and countryside temples with deities who were personal, local, and intimately connected to everyday concerns. This realm of belief is often referred to as folk religion, but in truth, it is better understood as a dynamic blend of mythology, ancestor worship, ritual, and local storytelling. It is not a separate religion like Daoism or Buddhism, but a fluid tradition that borrowed freely from both, even as it retained its own unique rituals, festivals, and deities. At the center of folk religion is the belief that the spiritual world is everywhere, not only in heaven and hell, but in homes, rivers, village gates, ancestral tablets, and the corners of kitchens. Every space has its guardian, every action its spiritual resonance, and every community its own divine figures. These gods, spirits, and legendary heroes were often deeply tied to the needs of the local population, protecting crops, averting disease, ensuring fertility, or granting prosperity. One of the most widely worshipped figures in Chinese folk religion is the Tudigong, or earth god. Unlike the celestial gods of high Daoist temples, Tudigong is local and approachable. Every village, and sometimes even each neighborhood, might have its own Tudigong shrine. Often depicted as an elderly man with a long beard and simple robe, he is responsible for the well-being of a specific patch of land. Farmers pray to him before planting and harvesting, shopkeepers offer incense for good business, and families seek his favor for peace and protection. Tudigong is also believed to keep watch over the spirits of the dead buried in his territory. For this reason, his shrines are commonly found near graveyards and family tombs. His modest stature and iconography reflects his closeness to the people, not grand or distant, but familiar and attentive. Equally important in the domestic sphere is Zhao Jun, the kitchen god. According to tradition, Zhao Jun resides in the family kitchen, where he observes the household's behavior throughout the year. Just before the Lunar New Year, he returns to heaven to report to the Jade Emperor on the family's conduct. To ensure a favorable report, families make offerings, particularly sweet foods such as sugar or sticky rice, to sweeten his mouth. Zhao Jun's origin story varies across regions. In one popular version, he was once a mortal man who wronged his devoted wife and was punished for his actions. In remorse, he threw himself into the hearth, and the Jade Emperor, moved by his repentance, appointed him as a minor deity to oversee families and encourage virtue. His story reflects the moralistic tone that often underlies folk mythology. Gods are not only powerful, but also deeply involved in shaping ethical behavior. Folk religion also places great importance on ancestral spirits. Ancestor worship is not about deification, but about maintaining connection. The spirits of the deceased are believed to continue influencing the fortunes of their descendants. Families honor them through offerings at home altars, tomb-sweeping rituals, and annual festivals such as Qingming, the Tomb Sweeping Day. At these times, people burn paper money, incense, and symbolic items to support their ancestors in the afterlife. This veneration reinforces family lineage, filial piety, and social continuity, core values that shaped Chinese society for millennia. In many households, ancestors and household gods coexist on the same altar, symbolizing the interwoven relationship between the divine, the departed, and the living. Beyond household and village boundaries, folk religion gave rise to regional deities whose myths and miracles spread through oral tradition, local records, and temple networks. One such figure is Mazu, the goddess of the sea. Originating in Fujian province, Mazu was believed to have been a mortal girl named Lin Monyang, who died young while trying to save her family during a storm. After her death, sailors and fishermen began reporting visions of her guiding their ships to safety. Over time, she was venerated as a protective sea goddess, and her cult spread along the southern and southeastern coasts of China. Mazu's worship is an example of how folk belief can evolve into widespread religious tradition. Her temples, often located at harbors and coastal towns, serve not only as religious centers but as community gathering places. Emperors from various dynasties recognized her importance by granting her titles and incorporating her into state religion, illustrating how folk deities could rise into the official pantheon through popular support. Another famous figure is Baosheng Dadi, a deified physician worshipped in parts of southern China and Taiwan. He was believed to have miraculous healing abilities, and his legend grew from stories of medical aid and divine intervention. His temples became places where people sought healing, made vows, and offered thanks for recovery, practices that blurred the line between religion and medicine. Folk religion also incorporated ritual specialists, such as spirit mediums, exorcists, and ritual masters, who performed ceremonies for the community. These practitioners might be consulted for everything from treating illness to driving out malevolent spirits, blessing new homes, or mediating with local deities. Their work involved chanting, divination, symbolic objects, and deep knowledge of local myth and ritual. One important ritual tradition is that of the village festival, often tied to the birthday of a local god. These festivals involve processions, opera performances, offerings, and community feasts. They serve both religious and social purposes, renewing the community's bond with the divine and with each other. During such festivals, the boundaries between myth and daily life dissolve, and the gods return to walk among the people. Notably, folk religion is highly adaptive. Local stories often reframe national deities to fit regional needs. A thunder god might become a stormbringer in a coastal town, while a fertility goddess might be invoked for harvest in a mountain village. Even foreign deities introduced through trade or migration could be absorbed into local belief systems and reimagined through Chinese cultural lenses. Despite centuries of transformation, suppression, and modernization, folk religion has persisted. During periods of imperial control, some folk practices were dismissed by officials as superstition. During the 20th century, particularly under revolutionary regimes, many temples were closed or destroyed, and public rituals were restricted. Yet, the intimacy and practicality of folk belief ensured its survival. In rural areas, families continued their private offerings, whispered prayers, and seasonal rites. In urban environments, traditions were adapted to apartment living and city temples. In overseas Chinese communities, from Southeast Asia to North America, folk religion became a way to preserve identity and continuity, especially for migrant families navigating new environments. Today, there is a resurgence of interest in folk religion within China and among the Chinese diaspora. Restored temples, public festivals, and revived rituals reflect a renewed embrace of cultural heritage. Government attitudes have softened in many areas, allowing for a more open expression of popular religious practices, especially when tied to tourism, heritage, or community development. Folk religion continues to evolve in response to modern life. People now burn paper replicas of smartphones, credit cards, and designer bags as offerings to ancestors. Temples use digital donation boxes, and some festivals are live-streamed to global audiences. Yet the essence remains unchanged, a belief that the divine is near, that everyday life is spiritually significant, and that through ritual and story, humans maintain a sacred bond with the unseen world. Folk religion reminds us that mythology is not only found in ancient texts or grand temples. It lives in kitchens, doorways, family tombs, and whispered prayers. It is not frozen in time, but alive in practice, shaped by the people who tell its stories, perform its rituals, and carry its faith into each new generation. As China entered the modern era, its ancient mythology, carried through centuries by poets, monks, storytellers, and temple rituals, faced its greatest test. The collapse of dynasties, the rise of new political ideologies, foreign invasions, and revolutionary reform all brought unprecedented change to every aspect of Chinese life. And in the midst of these transformations, the place of mythology was challenged, reshaped, and, in many cases, suppressed. Yet, despite all pressures, the stories did not vanish. Chinese mythology would prove not only resilient, but remarkably adaptable, finding new expression in literature, popular media, global culture, and spiritual revival. In the late imperial period, particularly during the Qing dynasty, the foundations of Chinese mythology remained widespread through folk practice, literature, and religious festivals. But as the 19th century unfolded, foreign powers exerted increasing influence on China, bringing not only military and economic pressure, but also Western philosophies, religions, and scientific worldviews that questioned traditional beliefs. The fall of the Qing dynasty in the early 20th century and the subsequent rise of the Republic of China ushered in an era of intellectual awakening. Reformers and modernizers, influenced by both Enlightenment ideals and nationalism, began to criticize old customs, superstitions, and feudal traditions. Many saw Chinese mythology, especially folk religion and ancestral rites, as remnants of a backward past that had to be discarded for the nation to modernize. The May 4th movement, a cultural and political movement that emerged in the year 1919, exemplified this tension. Young intellectuals promoted science, democracy, and literary reform, advocating the abandonment of what they viewed as irrational traditions. Myths were reinterpreted or dismissed. Temples were abandoned or repurposed. Local deities were no longer venerated with the same public ceremony, and mythological education began to fade from the formal school curriculum. However, not all voices called for rejection. Some scholars, writers, and artists saw mythology as a rich cultural resource. They sought to reinterpret and preserve these stories, not as literal truths or religious dogma, but as expressions of national identity. This period saw the publication of collections of ancient myths, including annotated versions of the Classic of Mountains and Seas, The Investiture of the Gods, and Journey to the West. Modern writers like Lu Xun, while often critical of superstition, also acknowledge the symbolic depth and narrative power of traditional myths. The political upheavals of the mid-20th century posed a more severe threat to mythological practice. Following the establishment of the People's Republic of China in the year 1949, the new government implemented campaigns to eradicate what it called the Four Olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. Mythology, folk religion, and temple festivals were often included under this umbrella. During the Cultural Revolution, which began in the mid-1960s, temples were destroyed, statues were smashed, and ancestral tablets were burned. Public worship was banned, and many folk practitioners were persecuted or silenced. Entire generations grew up with limited exposure to traditional mythology, except through state-approved literature or carefully curated folk art stripped of religious content. And yet, mythology did not disappear. Even under suppression, many families continued to observe festivals in private. Stories were whispered at night, passed from grandparents to grandchildren. Opera troupes kept the names of Sun Wukong and Guan Yin alive through coded performances. In rural areas, certain customs survived underground, adapted into local rituals or disguised as secular celebrations. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and among the Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia and beyond, Chinese mythology remained vibrant. Temples thrived in Singapore, Malaysia, and the Chinatowns of North America. Festivals like the Mid-Autumn Festival and Lunar New Year preserved mythic elements such as the Jade Rabbit, Chang'e, and the Neon Monster. In these regions, mythology remained not only a source of spiritual meaning, but also a powerful marker of cultural identity. Beginning in the late 20th century, as China opened up economically and culturally, the atmosphere toward traditional beliefs began to shift. Restrictions eased, temples were rebuilt, local festivals reappeared. Folklore research, once marginalized, returned as a respected academic field. A revival of interest in traditional Chinese culture, spanning calligraphy, medicine, Confucianism, and mythology, gained momentum across all levels of society. One of the most visible signs of this revival has been the return of mythology to popular media. In literature, new retellings of classic myths began to emerge, often reimagined for modern audiences. Novels explored the psychology of legendary figures or used mythic settings to reflect contemporary concerns. In television and film, adaptations of Journey to the West became especially popular, with countless versions produced since the early 1980s. The Monkey King, once an object of spiritual allegory, became an action hero, a comedic figure, and even a tragic rebel. He resonated with viewers across generations as a symbol of resilience, transformation, and inner struggle. Animated films and fantasy epics embraced Chinese mythology with growing sophistication. Works such as Nezha, White Snake, and Big Fish and Begonia drew from classical myths but employed modern animation, cinematic storytelling, and emotional depth. These adaptations appealed to both young audiences and nostalgic adults, creating a bridge between ancient stories and digital storytelling. Mythology also found a home in video games, web novels, and comics. Characters like Guan Yin, Erlang Shen, and Ao Guang appeared not in dusty scrolls, but in battle arenas, strategy games, and alternate universes. While purists might critique these adaptations as distortions, they have undeniably brought Chinese myth to global audiences, sparking new curiosity and engagement. Beyond entertainment, mythology is increasingly recognized as a source of philosophical and ecological insight. The Daoist reverence for nature, the moral teachings embedded in mythic cycles, and the emphasis on balance and transformation are being revisited in the context of environmental thought, psychological wellness, and cultural preservation. In academic circles, scholars now approach Chinese mythology not as a relic of the past, but as a living tradition. Research spans archaeology, anthropology, religious studies, and literary criticism, uncovering layers of meaning in even the simplest folktale. Museums host exhibitions on mythic creatures, scholars publish annotated editions of ancient texts, and universities offer courses in mythology alongside history and philosophy. In education, especially in primary schools, there is renewed emphasis on telling the old stories, of Pangu opening the sky, of Nuwa repairing the heavens, of Yu controlling the floods. These tales, once suppressed or sidelined, are now being reintroduced as foundational elements of cultural literacy and identity. Even in spiritual practice, there is revival. Daoist temples once closed are now active again, with priests performing rites for the 8 immortals, Mazu, and local earth gods. Buddhist temples continue to honor Guan Yin, who remains the most widely venerated figure in modern Chinese spirituality. Pilgrimage sites such as Mount Putuo see tens of thousands of visitors each year. Folk festivals draw large crowds, and young people increasingly participate in traditional rituals once dismissed as outdated. What has emerged in recent decades is not simply a return to old beliefs, but a reinterpretation. Chinese mythology today is not bound by rigid dogma. It exists in layers: spiritual, cultural, artistic, and philosophical. It serves as a source of identity, a well of storytelling, and a mirror for contemporary values. In diaspora communities, especially among second- and third-generation Chinese youth, mythology offers a way to reconnect with heritage. Through art, language learning, and digital media, these stories are being rediscovered, retold, and reimagined in new voices. Whether as graphic novels, short films, or cosplay characters, the mythological past continues to speak to modern questions of belonging, resilience, and meaning. The survival and revival of Chinese mythology in the modern world reveal not only the strength of tradition, but the power of storytelling. These myths have endured wars, revolutions, exiles, and erasures. They have traveled across oceans and returned through fiber optic cables, and they remain still part of the living fabric of Chinese life, adapting to each new era, yet always retaining their core truths. In them, we find not only the stories of gods, dragons, and immortals, but the enduring human quest for harmony, identity, and transcendence. Myths do not end. They continue to evolve, just as the people who carry them forward do. After thousands of years of evolution, through oral tradition, ritual, literature, state codification, suppression, and revival, Chinese mythology continues to resonate as both a cultural foundation and a living force. What makes this mythological tradition exceptional is not merely its age or volume, but its remarkable adaptability, its depth of symbolism, and its ability to integrate the moral, cosmic, and personal dimensions of life into a single narrative system. In this final chapter of our exploration, we turn our attention to the enduring legacy of Chinese mythology, how it continues to shape modern Chinese identity, how it is being transmitted across generations and borders, and what it offers the world today in terms of wisdom, creativity, and meaning. One of the most powerful aspects of Chinese mythology is its continuity. Despite wars, regime changes, revolutions, and ideological shifts, the stories never vanished. They persisted not because of state enforcement, but because they remained embedded in everyday life. Whether in the form of New Year rituals invoking the kitchen god, dragon dances chasing away the neon monster, or school children learning about the Monkey King, mythology remains present in the rhythms of the year, the language of values, and the symbols of community. In fact, many elements of Chinese mythology are so thoroughly woven into daily culture that they are often taken for granted. When someone refers to someone as having dragon energy, or when a parent encourages a child born in the year of the tiger to be brave, they are drawing on mythic frameworks without necessarily identifying them as such. Likewise, the concepts of yin and yang, the five elements, and the cycle of heavenly stems and earthly branches, all rooted in mythological cosmology, continue to inform Chinese medicine, feng shui, and even business planning. This seamless blend of the mythical with the practical is one of the most defining characteristics of Chinese mythology. Unlike mythologies that exist purely in the realm of fable or theology, Chinese myths are deeply functional. They are tools for navigating time, space, fate, morality, and the unseen dimensions of the world. In diasporic Chinese communities around the world, mythology also continues to provide a cultural anchor. As younger generations grow up speaking new languages and living in new societies, traditional myths offer a point of return, a shared narrative that links them to ancestors, to ancestral lands, and to an ongoing civilizational story. Whether through temple festivals in Singapore, lion dances in San Francisco, or storytelling circles in Toronto, the myths keep speaking. In recent years, there has also been a surge of academic interest in Chinese mythology, not only in China, but globally. Universities across Asia, North America, and Europe have established courses, conferences, and research centers devoted to exploring Chinese mythic texts, artistic representations, and cultural interpretations. This growing body of scholarship is helping to recontextualize myths, identify regional variants, and highlight the dynamic ways in which these stories have interacted with philosophy, politics, and social change. Beyond academia, the creative industries continue to rediscover and reinterpret mythological material. Chinese film and television studios are increasingly producing high-budget adaptations of classic myths. Popular series based on the investiture of the gods, the Eight Immortals, or Neja draw large viewerships, blending special effects with traditional storytelling. These adaptations often recast ancient characters in more human or psychologically complex ways, allowing audiences to see old legends through modern lenses. Meanwhile, in the world of literature and digital fiction, web novels and fantasy sagas based on mythological themes have become incredibly popular. Online platforms feature thousands of serialized stories where dragons rule kingdoms, immortals wander modern cities, and gods descend into contemporary life to settle ancient scores or protect sacred knowledge. These stories are often written by amateur authors and consumed by millions of young readers hungry for a fusion of tradition and imagination. Perhaps more surprising is the way Chinese mythology has begun to enter global popular culture. International authors, artists, and filmmakers are increasingly engaging with Chinese myths, sometimes in respectful homage, other times as part of broader cross-cultural experimentation. Films like Kung Fu Panda, novels by authors of Chinese heritage such as Grace Lin and F.C. Yi, and games that draw on Daoist and Buddhist cosmologies are examples of how these myths are becoming part of the global mythic imagination. However, this global spread also raises questions of interpretation, appropriation, and authenticity. As Chinese mythology becomes more visible worldwide, there is a growing responsibility to ensure that these stories are represented with cultural depth, historical context, and respect for their origins. Myth, after all, is not just entertainment, it is memory, identity, and meaning. It carries the weight of generations and the spiritual life of entire communities. Within China itself, there is an ongoing debate about the role of tradition in a modern society. While economic growth, technological innovation, and global engagement dominate national priorities, there is also a parallel movement to reclaim cultural heritage. Government initiatives now promote intangible cultural traditions, including myths, legends, and folk practices, as valuable parts of Chinese soft power and national pride. At the same time, younger generations, especially urban youth, are exploring mythology on their own terms. Some find meaning in traditional festivals, others find it in cosplay, animation, or role-playing games. For them, mythology is not something frozen in a museum or locked in a textbook. It is something to be remixed, reimagined, and even challenged. And this is not a departure from tradition, but a continuation of it. Chinese mythology has always evolved through retelling. Each era has made its own contribution to the mythic imagination. As we conclude this journey through Chinese mythology, from Pangu's cosmic separation to Guan Yin's compassionate gaze, from the dragon's flight to the fox spirit's whisper, from the thunderous courts of the Jade Emperor to the quiet offerings on a kitchen altar, we are reminded that these stories are not just about gods and heroes. They are about what it means to be human. They are about the fear of chaos and the longing for order, the tension between fate and free will, the hope that good deeds will be rewarded and that suffering has meaning, the belief that life, in all its complexity, is part of a larger pattern, one that connects heaven, earth, and humanity in a single flowing current. In an age where technology races ahead and ancient ways of life are being transformed or forgotten, mythology offers a counterweight. It asks us to remember where we came from, to honor the stories that shaped us, and to carry them forward with care and creativity. Chinese mythology is not just a body of old tales, it is a living tradition. It lives in temples and textbooks, in childhood lullabies and blockbuster films, in whispered prayers and bold reimaginings. It lives wherever people seek meaning, connection, and beauty in a world that still holds mystery. And so the story continues, as it always has, as it always will, as it always will.